Hello and welcome to the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and here we have another episode where I chat with somebody connected to Paul Weller's life and career to discover more about the man and his music. Now on Series 3, not only are we counting down to the brand new covers album from Paul Weller, and recent episodes have included plenty of that, but also my own book, an idea of Paul Weller's himself, coming out this September. Paul Weller, Dancing Through the Fire, the Authorized Oral History. Now, what I should say is that this isn't a bunch of transcripts from the podcast. This is a full oral history covering nearly 50 years in music and more. And one of those conversations that I had was with a true icon, singer, songwriter, DJ, author, cultural trailblazer, Boy George. We had about 20 minutes together, a little snapshot just to pick his brains on some little Weller stories that I wanted to include. From the early days of seeing Paul on Wardour Street, touring together in Japan with the Style Council and Culture Club. Hilarious stories involving Marilyn, Mick Talbot's wife, hi Shani if you're listening, and wild nights out. We're going to talk about punk influences, songwriting, integrity, plus how Boy George ended up performing on the A Kind Revolution album, that beautiful song One's Here, plus You're the Best Thing with the BBC Orchestra on the gig during COVID, which became Orchestrated's songbook. A real delight. I debated for a while on whether to share this as a podcast episode because it was intended for the book, but I thought, you know what, this is so good. I'm going to share this with you now. Let's get into it. Boy George, thanks for joining me. Lovely to see you.
You too. So the first time I ever saw Paul Weller was before I ever saw him on TV. I saw him at the top of Wardour Street. I mean, I suppose it was sort of punk times, sort of end of punk, you know. I was going into the Vortex and I remember seeing this guy on the corner of the street, like in this blue suit, you know, with this amazing mod haircut. Very striking. And I remember sort of people saying, oh, he's in this band called The Jam. I'd never heard them, but I remember thinking, oh, he looks so fantastic. And I think he was going to come into the Vortex, but he decided not to. It was like a really hardcore punk club on the top of Wardour Street. So that was the first time I ever saw Paul. And then, of course, the next time I saw him was on Top of the Pops with The Jam. So I remembered sort of like, you know, it's so funny. I remembered before I'd even made a record myself, I hadn't even really started a band, but you know, he stood out, you know, and I think that was the thing then, you know, it's like, because it was punk time, it wasn't really about mods. So, you know, he definitely found his perfect corner.
He said to me that he felt almost like at odds with the punk scene in a way, because they kind of embraced that and their music changed to embrace that, but he never really felt like he fitted into that world, I guess.
Although early Jam's quite punk. There is a sort of punk aspect because that music is rock and roll. I tend to think that there isn't really much in a lot of things when you go back. If you listen to a lot of 70s music, it's all kind of the blues. And it's kind of versions of versions. I feel like there's always elements of everything. Anything you love sounds like a lot of other things. It might have its sensibilities tuned to a particular style, but there was a lot of rage in Paul in the early days, you know, and the sort of going underground. And there was definitely a punk attitude in them, even if they didn't see themselves as punk. So I think, you know, from a music perspective, I felt like it spoke to me. You know, I didn't actually think Paul was particularly like mods. It wasn't literal mod. It was elements of it, but I think that I think it had a punky feel to it, and I don't think that was accidental. I think, you know, whatever he says, I think, you know, because musicians, we can't leave anything out.
Well, you're all magpies in a way, aren't you, as well? Like taking it,
and Paul's a Gemini like me. So, you know, you're always like, oh, I hate it, I love it, I hate it, I love it, you know. To me, I mean, I know we're jumping on it a little bit here, but I remember like when Paul got into Bowie, that was like never going to happen. And then it was like, oh my God, he's got it.
It's finally.
He's got it. And it was so beautiful from, you know, because I'm a massive Bowie fan. So, you know.
Oh, wow. I've not noticed your tattoos before. Wow. Incredible.
So me, I remember that, what was the album that was the turning point? I can't remember the name of the album, but there was an album where I was like, oh my God, I can hear some Bowie in here. You know, and then I spoke to him about it and he was like, yeah, no, totally. Because I hated him, but I didn't get it. But I'm always worried about anyone that doesn't get Bowie. So that was a saving grace.
Well, by that point, you'd grown a friendship for a long time. But am I right in thinking that you met in the BBC bar, the first meeting? Was that right?
I think so, yeah. Because I remember, as I say, I remembered seeing him before I got famous. So I don't know whether I went up to him and said, oh, I remember seeing you at, you know, Wardour Street, whatever. But yeah, I think we got on pretty well, actually. It was like, especially at that time, a lot of bands a lot of other bands looked at us, particularly me, and they were like, oh, what's that about? Sort of closed horse, no substance type of thing, which used to really annoy me. So, when you met someone that was like cool, but they were nice, it made a difference. There's nothing worse when you're a musician and you meet someone you really like and they're a tosser, to use that word, but it's such a 70s word, and you just go, oh no, I'm so happy that I met them and they were cool, because I don't care if I like someone, I can still like the records, but it helps a lot if you actually do like the person as well. And I think Paul is someone, with a lot of integrity. I remember him saying, because obviously, Culture Club have got back together so many times. He was like, oh, bands only get back together for the money. It's really not true, actually. I think it's so complicated, you know what I mean? But, I remember sort of people saying, oh, you ever get back with the jam? And it was like, hell will freeze over.
Never going to do it. The thing was, really early Style Council, at which point Culture Club are taking off as well, early 80s, right? Or have taken off at that point. Paul was actually interviewed by Timmy Mallet, of all things, on Piccadilly Radio. This is a really early interview. And he was I think if you ever heard this, he was dismissing pretty much every band that Timmy mentioned to him. And then he mentioned you and he's like, oh yeah, Culture Club are great. He loves your voice, he was talking about. But everybody else, he was like, no, they're crap.
I know I would have been very upset if he'd have slagged us off, you know what I mean? Because, as I say, I've always loved his music, and actually we toured with each other in Japan with the Style Council. We went to Japan and that was mad. And there's so many weird connections, because I don't know if I should tell you this, but
go on.
Mick Talbot's wife stole one of my boyfriends.
No, Shaney?
Yeah, Shaney stole my bloke off me. It's so funny because we were like best friends. Me and Shaney were like best friends. And I was having this secret relationship with this friend of mine and she knew. I mean, listen, basically, now when I look back, it's funny. I look back and I think, well, she was me, but female. We were so similar, me and Shane. We used to dress up crazy. This was before she met Mick. And she ran off with this bloke I was in love with. So it really broke my heart. But we're like really good mates now. We thought, so you could fucking have him now. When I think back to it, it was like we were so similar. It's just unfortunately I wasn't a girl and she was. Damn. But there's so many mad connections, with his, with Mick Talbot and Shane and Paul and everything. So when we went to Japan, I don't know if he'd met Shane then. Had he? I'm not sure. Maybe we discussed it. I remember having a mad time in Japan with the Style Council, and then Billy Mackenzie was there.
Yeah, the associates were there, right? And Go West, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then Go West, and then there was Jocelyn Brown was singing backing vocals for us. There was this mad moment where we sort of got Billy to come on and sing with us, and he just went off on this insane tangent, screaming like a crazy person. I remember Jocelyn Brown looking at me going... I loved Billy. Billy was amazing.
There was this wonderful magazine article that two of you did together. Number One magazine.
Number one, yeah, where I've got a fur coat on.
Yeah, and you got to dress him almost, and you put makeup on him.
I put makeup on him, and his mum was like, who put that on your face? It was so funny. I was like, me. One of my favourite things about Paul Weller, I always say this, there was this interview, because obviously Marilyn and me used to know him in the 80s, and Marilyn insisted that he slept with Paul, right? We used to say it all the time. And there was this great interview where the journalist said to Paul Weller, did you go out with Marilyn? And Paul said, well, if you said I did, I must have done, which I thought was the fucking coolest thing. Talk about shut down a question. I thought, it's so cool. More people should be like that. He was like, I don't know, maybe.
There was actually somebody on the podcast, I don't know if you know Anthony Harty. He was playing in the Style Council around that time.
I remember the name, yeah.
And he said he remembers going to Solid Bond and you and Marilyn having a fight on the lawn.
That's possible, yeah. We were in fights everywhere. But I think because Marilyn always wanted everyone to himself. So I was like, he couldn't share Paul. He was very jealous. If you ever want to interview, have a lunatic interview with anyone, try and interview Marilyn about Paul Weller. I mean, it's so funny because I don't think any of it's true, but it is fucking entertaining. I'm like, oh, really?
That interview that two of you did together, or you did with Paul, at that point, he was writing more and more political stuff, or starting to. And you talked about how he was, I'll give you the quote. You said, I find Paul Weller idealistic to the point of being naive, but he really does care about everything he does, was what you said.
Well, I think Geminis, we are very like that, aren't we? We're very socially aware. We're very passionate, but also we're always in two minds about everything. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like myself, Paul has got much calmer as he's got older. There's still that kind of essence of who he is, but he's more chilled now. There's a kind of wiseness. He knows what to get upset about and what not to, which I think is similar to me. I'm like, the things I used to care about, I don't. I mean, I'm still very socially aware and I like to know what's going on in the world. But I think at that point, because it was around the time of all the red wedge and all of that stuff, and I was getting a lot of stick off people because it was like I was considered to not be enough of a flag waver for LGBT. We didn't call it then, but it was like, why aren't you saying more? And I was like, I felt like I was living it. I didn't think I needed to kind of wave a flag. I thought my whole existence was, it's like my image and the way I looked. Not that every gay person wears a hat and makeup, but put my head on the chopping block. So people were like, oh, you're a puff. It cut out all the small talk. So I felt like my whole existence was kind of, what else do I have to do? I remember my brothers used to say to me, people always ask me if you're really gay. And I was like, what else do I have to do? And also, because I was writing an article, I suppose I was trying to be intellectual. So, because obviously, I don't really know the ins and outs of what Paul thinks or doesn't think, but I've always liked him. I've always just thought it's not hard work. When you meet someone who's a musician and you've got respect for them and, as I say, when you love what they do, I mean, that's entertainment. I used to fucking play that to like my ears bled. I just love that. I love the Morrissey version as well. Yeah, I think he's a great writer.
It seems to me both of you have been dismissed in a sense and had to kind of fight back again and proving your worth in the music industry, in the music business. I don't know that you've always got your dues as a songwriter, I'll be honest with you, but it feels like you've had to kind of find your own path and kind of battle. But you've never followed the trend, either of you, right? You've never kind of gone, actually, this is the thing that's popular right now, I'll jump on board that.
Well, we're not really nostalgic, because I think Gemini's love now. We know that life doesn't exist in the past or the future. It's always now. And I often get accused of doing too much because I do a lot of music. I mean, I've released 54 tracks in the last year on Spotify, and I do art, and I'm always writing every day. I write songs all the time, all sorts of styles. I don't really stick to any particular vibe. I write dance music, whatever I feel like. And I think what I like about Paul is he's as prolific as I am. There's that kind of impulse that you just can't stop recording. And whenever I get told I do too much, I go, look at Paul Weller. Fucking put 4 albums out in 5 minutes. I mean, the guys are always like, so I do use him as a bit of an example when people say, I'll do too much. I'm like, no, because it's the process of what we do. I'm not sure what it's like for Paul, but as I've got older, I definitely enjoy, making the thing. It's like the physical act of doing music. Making a piece of art is what I actually enjoy because you've got no control over the reactions. You've got no control over whether someone thinks it's good or bad. But I'll tell you I had this funny phone call with Paul about 4 years ago. I was doing something with Mikey Craig from Culture Club. We'd had this row and he'd really annoyed me. And I got back to my house and I was like raging, and Paul called me randomly and I was like, oh, how are you? And I said, I just had this massive row with Mikey, and Paul goes to me, yeah, democracy in rock and roll, it's a fucking disaster. He goes, somebody has to be in charge. And I think he's right, to a certain degree. I just think Geminis don't like compromise. We find that word quite difficult. I think all musicians think they're the only ones that can do it, right? Particularly Geminis. We just, because, as I say, it's instinctual. Creativity is just this thing that drives us and we can't really understand what it is,
Have you ever tried to get in a room and write together?
We've talked about it so much and we definitely will do it at some point, and I really would love to do that because I think I'm a lot better at collaborating now than I used to be. I definitely used to be a bit controlling in the studio, which I'm sure Paul is as well. Because we haven't got patience. I've got more open with it, I'm definitely a better collaborator. So I think it would be a great thing to do. And there's mutual respect. So I feel like it would be fun. But working on One Tier, yeah, it was amazing. I was like, it's a funny thing that happens when let's say when you're going to work with someone that you respect, you get this fear of like, shit, it's the wrong key. I don't know if I can do it. And then when you step on the mic, suddenly it's another world. And when I did that track, I was like, oh yeah, I've catastrophized for like weeks and days before. And then I went in the studio and I was like, easy. It was just great. It was like quick, vibey. It just worked, and I love it.
Didn't get to perform that live with Paul, I don't think. Is that right?
No, I haven't done that yet. No,
No.
but
I think Paul said he'd love to take you on the road, but your wardrobe would be too big.
no, I'm very basic these days.
I remember watching this was during lockdown, wasn't it? The gig at the Barbican that we all had to watch on the internet with Jules Buckley and the BBC Orchestra and James Morrison, Celeste, and you. And we didn't know, watching it beforehand, didn't know who was going to pop up. And then suddenly it was like, oh my God. And doing a song that Paul very rarely had performed live, actually, You're the Best Thing. So how did that all come about?
That again was so terrifying because I was like, oh my God, I can't sing that song, because it's a great song, isn't it? It's such a beautiful song and he does it so well. Yeah, he just asked me and I was like, when he said that song, I was like, ooh, it's like, but yeah, I feel like when you're performing something like that, you just got to sort of let go of it and just try and be as emotional as you can and respect writing. I love that song. And there was talk about maybe doing Wildwood, which I also loved. I think it was a good choice, really good choice.
And how does that work? Do you, there are not loads of rehearsals with the orchestra, presumably.
Zero, really. There was a rehearsal in the afternoon, one rehearsal, two, I think, maybe. And then I got sent a rough track. I had it at home, so I was able to sing it. And then you go and do it. And it was just magical.
Wow, that's mad. A couple of final questions. So last year we got your autobiography, Karma. As part of this project, I'm turning this whole podcast into a big oral history book, massive big book. What advice would you give to me as actually there's multiple books you've done now, but as an author from that side of you, that creative side of you, what advice would you give me on creating the definitive Weller book? Just
try to find his voice. I think that's the key. If he's not going to do it, then you have to try and make it sound like him, like what he would say. But also, you're allowed to put your own voice in it. You're a fan. So you just be honest. I think just be truthful about what you feel and try and get as much detail as possible without being boring. You don't want to miss the essence of, there's a sort of urgency about what Paul does, and he doesn't necessarily, it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't want to write it down or can't be bothered to. Because, I have to say, when I was younger, I would read everything about myself. Now I'm very rarely would sit down and watch an interview or read it back. I'm like, oh, whatever, it's like, who cares? I've changed my mind since yesterday. I don't need to watch it back, But I think, just be honest and, don't try and be clever. Just speak in plain terms. Just tell the truth. The truth is always more interesting than anything you can make up. Particularly with someone like Paul, but also he's quite private, isn't he? He's not like me. I'll tell everyone everything, whereas Paul's a little bit more, he's a bit cooler than I am. Well, yeah, but much like yourself, I'd love to see him in the jungle. That was a great experience of watching you. Can you imagine? Oh my God, he would hate it. I would, if he rang me to tell me, I was like, don't do it. He was fucking, no. He's too cool to go in the jungle. Now, there was one thing I should have asked you about back in the day. There was apparently a pub that you all used to go to. That it sounds a bit like Stella Street, where like the entire rock and roll world would all be going to the same pub. That was near the studio, I think. Right, yeah. But you were clearly all hanging out together, right? This wasn't just a kind of a showbiz music relationship in a sense. Yeah, but, it's funny because I never go in pubs now. I think it was a sort of follow-on from the 70s. There was a lot of, when we were punks, there was a lot of pubs. We used to go into a lot of pubs. And then there was the period where I used to get turned away from every single pub I went to during the New Romantic period when it got a little bit more extreme. When I was dressing up as a nun, I got turned away from so many pubs. There's so many pubs in London. I went there and they could turn me away, bastards. But yeah, that particular, what was the name of that place? Do you know? I don't know. I was going to ask you if you knew. No, that's to ask Marilyn. I need to book Marilyn straight after this. Oh my God, he was just fucking, I don't think it'd be usable. No, possibly not. He's got this whole thing where he says Paul bought him a book on like Labour. It just sounds like so far-fetched. I'm like, really? Two final questions. I know you're short on time, so let me ask you about 2025. New music? Obviously. With sort of musical projects, I never know really which way I'm going. I have this sort of Irish project that I would like to do where I've written a load of songs about my mum, because I lost my mum a couple of years ago. And I realized I've got a whole bunch of songs that I wrote about my mum. And I've never really done a kind of fully Irish tribute. And so I'd like to do that. So this week I've been working with some Irish musicians on some things, and it's given me the bug to finish the record, So there's that. I've got some DJing coming up in the summer. Yeah, variety, man. I just love doing everything, And I know Paul's flirted with dance music during the Acid House time. He did a lot of dance stuff. So yeah, I like to just mix it up, and I tend to really enjoy what I do more now. So it's, I love playing live. It's a totally different experience for me than it used to be. Yeah, I get to really enjoy what I do. So I'll just do everything,
Nice. Final question. I ask this of everybody who's come on the podcast and for the book as well. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It could be The Jam, The Style Council, or solo. What would you go with?
You do something to me. There's so many. There's so many. Actually, I have to say that is a real compliment because there's certain people like they got one or two tunes, but Paul's like got so many great songs. I mean, I love Wildwood. Love that. I love The Cranes Are Back. I love that.
Oh yeah, that's a great song.
Love that. It's endless. There's a lot.
You were really into Long Hot Summer, I remember reading as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I love that. But You Do Something to Me is just like that's a special one.
This has been such a delight. Thank you for sparing the time.
Good luck with it. I can't wait to see what you do. See you later.
My thanks once again to Boy George for chatting with me for the book, now a podcast. What an honour. I love that idea that here are two British icons who have lots of differences, I'm sure, but they found common ground in this shared passion and their unwavering dedication to the power of music. And this beautiful, enduring friendship built on a foundation of mutual respect. Neither of them never losing their creative fire or their commitment to their craft. If you want to check out the show notes for this podcast, I put details about Boy George's autobiography, which is called Karma. And we didn't know this at the time. He mentioned he was making new music, and there's always new music flowing through George. SE18, a brand new album from Boy George, available now. PaulWellerFanPodcast.com is my website address. Whilst you're there, head into my store. You can grab yourself some podcast merchandise. You can order the book if you fancy it, or you can grab a virtual coffee as well. PaulWellerFanPodcast.com is where to go. Don't forget, share this episode on social media, spread the word. It's really hard these days with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to actually get proper content out there. So please do share, spread the word, and more episodes to come. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.